Hello, and welcome to Empowering Gifted Learners in Social Studies using Archetypes and EDUProtocols. In this short video, we're going to be looking at an education framework called EDUProtocols, specifically one that focuses on looking at and using archetypes as a way to make historical connections with historical thinking. My name is Kelly Bellar. I'm the K-12 Social Studies Consultant with Region 10. On this screen, you will see my contact information, my email address, and also if you are on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, you will see my Twitter accounts, both the Region 10 Social Studies one and my own personal professional one. I want to go ahead and make sure that you have access to this presentation because there are going to be some places where I'm going to encourage you to pause for a moment and explore some links that I'm going to share with you. And so wanted to make sure that you have access to this. So feel free to open up on a separate browser or on a different computer or however you want to do this. The bit.ly is linked here. Remember that bit.lys are case sensitive, so you'll want to be sure and type it in exactly as it shows on the screen, or feel free to scan the QR code. I'm going to pause for just a moment and allow you a chance to scan that. And then our goal for this session is really threefold. We're going to start by talking a little bit about what EDUProtocols are and how that connects to and support critical thinking. Then we will look at archetypes, look at a quick definition of archetypes, talk a little bit about some of the connections between archetypes, depth and complexity icons, and historical thinking. And then we will wrap up with looking at some examples of how you can apply this in the classroom. And then also some possible extension opportunities for your gifted and advanced learners. Just to kind of start off with, and feel free to please pause your video for a moment so that you can have a chance to think about this and jot down some notes, but just some food for thought. Thinking about your classroom of students, your GT, your gifted learners, your advanced learners, what are some of those challenges that you face when designing lessons for those gifted and advanced learners? What are some of those areas where you see some difficulty in making sure that you are creating some opportunity? If you are doing this or watching this video with a partner, maybe use this time to pause and have a short discussion with that partner. All right. Once you've had a chance to have that conversation, hopefully some things that came up were things about how to increase critical thinking, how to increase historical thinking, how to challenge students to kind of dig a little bit deeper or look at some more complex issues within history and social studies. All of those are areas where we really want to be able to challenge our gifted and advanced learners. So we're going to start off by looking really quickly at EDUProtocols, what those are, and their connections to critical thinking and historical thinking. So this is actually from the EDUProtocol field guide from the social studies edition. There are several editions. There's a math edition. There's, I believe, a science edition. There are some that are just general framework editions. But EDUProtocols, if you're not familiar with them, are lesson frames where curriculum is inserted to teach more effectively and deliver engaging content. The idea behind these are all tech-based in the sense that they use things like Google Slides or PowerPoint. They're also all designed really to be interactive for students. One of the things that they really encourage, the authors of these books, of the original books, and then there are other authors and people that have kind of joined in, is really how do these frameworks support the 4 C's, those 4 what we used to call the 21st century skills, although we're well into the 21st century at this point. So they're just, to me, they're life skills. But really thinking about how do these support the ideas of collaboration, wanting our students to interact with their peers through conversation, but also that kind of internal collaboration, I guess I would say, and having really students think about their own thinking, which leads to that critical thinking piece. Analyzing problems, analyzing data, researching, making connections with literature, really thinking about how they solve some of those real world problems. They also support communication. A lot of these frameworks are designed with the intention of students collaborating and communicating their thinking, their learning, even their reflection of their learning. And then they also all really support this idea of creativity. They're all kind of open-ended. They're very choice-driven. They do not necessarily ask for students to have one correct answer all the time. So EDUProtocols, like I said, really are a lesson framework. The idea here is that you use a protocol consistently. So like discussion protocols, you would use the same kind of framework, but then the content maybe is different. These are not necessarily social studies specific. There is an EDUProtocol field guide for social studies, but there are other protocols that connect. So on this slide, you'll see listed some different examples. Some of their more popular ones are what's called a thin slide. Thin slides essentially are, you provide students with this is really good for vocabulary. You provide students with a vocabulary term. Each student has a slide on a slide deck. On that slide, they provide a picture, a definition, and then maybe some kind of connection that they can make. And so the idea is that then when you turn around and present or share these, you would pop them up on the screen. Every student would very quickly share their slide. My slide is revolution. I've shown this picture. Here's my definition. Very, very simple. Another really popular one that's really good, especially for social studies, but really good for just literacy skills in general, is called Cyber Sandwich. The idea behind this one is you provide students with some piece of text to read. It could be a primary source, could be part of an article, whatever that is. Students are grouped in groups of maybe 2, possibly 3. I wouldn't go more than 4 on one of these. Each student has a slide, or kind of each student group has a slide deck to work with. They each individually would close read whatever that piece of text is using annotation tools or whatever those close reading strategies are that you use. And then each individual student would respond to that prompt on one slide by themselves, providing their summarization or their paraphrasing or takeaway from that piece. And then you would have students share and discuss with each other what they have created or come up with, and then they would create a combined response. So a combined writing piece. So it gets students to really practice with what close reading, what summarization looks like. And again, all of these are using some form of ed technology. So could be using Google Slides, could be using a Padlet, whatever those things, typically Google Slides. 8 parts is a document-based analysis tool. A FRAIR model, very simple, traditional FRAIR model, just you're using it on a Google slide or some kind of slide deck. A sketch and tell is a really great quick way of having students showcase their learning, providing some kind of topic. This could be as a review for students. Students are given that topic, then they would draw a quick sketch or create a quick sketch on a screen, and then they would summarize it, or they would tell what that is. And all of these involve the idea of students interacting with the content in some way individually, then collaborating, possibly having some communication. And then the third piece of that is always some sort of presentation or sharing out to a larger group, either a small group or maybe part of the class, or maybe the class as a whole. And then Iron Chef is one that we're going to look at here in just a little bit. So I'm going to hold off on explaining that one. On this slide, I have also linked here for you a link back to the EDUProtocols website. EDUProtocols has a series of books. Specifically, I have linked this to the history edition book itself, but just a couple of other things to kind of show you. EDUProtocols has a kind of a paid piece that they do professional development. You can purchase books, things like that. If you come over here to the side, you'll see one that says free templates and resources. And I'm going to kind of turn your attention to this one, because if you're not familiar with EDUProtocols, this is a really good place to get an introduction. So for each one of these, each one of the books, or most of the books, I should say, they will have a link. So for instance, here is Cyber Sandwich. It will give you a little bit of information, and then it will give you some templates and some examples of what this might look like, some instructions. There's usually a short little video that kind of summarizes it. So I'm going to encourage you to pause the video here for about 3-4 minutes. Click on this popular EDUProtocols link and go in and explore some of these different examples as well. While we're going to focus specifically on one type of EDUProtocol here in a few moments, I want to encourage you to look at some of these other ones also. So now that you've had a chance to explore some of those different EDUProtocols, let's move on and think about that connection to critical thinking. And I think this is a really interesting quote here. Critical thinking is not something you do once with an issue and then drop it. It requires that we update our knowledge as new information comes in. And this is really true in relation to using EDUProtocols. The idea here is that you utilize these frameworks consistently throughout the year. So pick 2 or 3 that are really your kind of favorites that you really use, and you use that framework often. The content may change. So rather than students having to relearn kind of the skill, you're building on those skills consistently, but you're plugging in the content at different times throughout the year and different content. But I also think this quote really speaks to this idea of critical thinking in general and historical thinking. And for our GT, our gifted and our advanced learners, really building on those historical thinking skills is going to be really key to extend and really challenge their learning. And so getting students to really think about what is it that historians do. Historians, as they are presented with a question that they're trying to answer, or a part of an event or a time period that they're focusing in on, they will start with really a compelling question. What is that big overarching question that they want to respond to? And then through the use of primary and secondary sources, pulling in those different sources, analyzing those, breaking those down, making those connections, looking at those, really utilizing those historical thinking skills, thinking about cause and effect, comparison, change over time. That's really where historians develop that interpretation of what that historical event is. The more information, the more knowledge that comes in, that may alter that interpretation in some way, or it may affirm it in more ways. So this idea of critical thinking is really, I think, something that is very powerful. And so getting our kids to think beyond just what they've read in a textbook, what they've watched on the news, but really getting kids to question, to critique it, and to build on that critical thinking, I think is really important here. Some other resources for you to pause the video again and share. Again, I've linked here the history edition once again, but 2 other people to kind of look into and find out a little bit more about how they use EDUProtocols. Adam Moeller is a teacher up in, I want to say, kind of Midwest Missouri area, possibly. And he has a blog that he posts called Moeller's Musings, where he really gives like a step-by-step every day of the week, basically, in his classroom. He teaches 8th grade US history. Every day of the week, he posts like, here's what we've done. And he uses a lot of these EDUProtocols. So he provides a lot of templates, a lot of examples. You can also follow him on Twitter as well, or X. And then another one that actually is a friend and colleague of Adam Moeller is Dr. Scott Petrie, and he's out of California. And History Rewriter is his blog. And both of these gentlemen, by the way, are the authors of the history edition for EDUProtocols. So they use them. They're very familiar with them. I know they also have a podcast that they share at times through the EDUProtocols Plus piece, where they provide resources. So if you want more information about EDUProtocols in general, I encourage you to take a look at their sites as well. So moving forward, now we're going to shift before we shift our thinking, take a moment and pause the video, going back and thinking back to that original question about what are some of those challenges. Now pause and think about how might the use of EDUProtocols in the classroom support the needs of your gifted and advanced learners. So pause the video, take a moment to think about that. Again, if you're watching this with a partner, you might use this as a time to have a quick conversation with them. So now we're going to move into our second section of our video, which is talking about archetypes and that connection to EDUProtocols, because there is a specific EDUProtocol that I want to highlight here that uses archetypes. So just in general, archetypes are those universal characters, symbols, situations that are found across cultures and stories. A lot of this is background to, if you're familiar with kind of in the literature world or the literacy world, thinking about men like Joseph Campbell, who did a lot of study on the power of myth and mythology. And so, recognizing that there are some of these characters or these universal ideas that really kind of transcend time and place. And so thinking about, when I'm looking at a piece of literature, whether that's Harry Potter or the Odyssey or Star Wars, that there's that hero character, or there may be that trickster character. And so thinking about who are some of those different archetypes throughout literature. What I find really interesting is that the guys here that have created these EDUProtocols have created one that looks at those archetypes in connection to historical figures. So this is a really good just image of some of those different archetypes. So who the hero is, or the sage, that wisdom, that intelligence kind of person, the innocent, the lover, the explorer. So thinking about who would be some of those different characters. So the EDUProtocol here that we're going to look at is called, and I'm going to jump ahead actually to show you, it's called an archetype foursquare. This is intended to be done as it's kind of a jigsaw type of an activity. So you might have on a slide deck 4 different individuals from a historical event or a time period, or even maybe 4 different historical events. Each student would take one of those slides to start off with, and they would identify who might some of those different archetypes be that are connected to those historical figures. They're then going to identify what are the different relationships and similarities. They're going to note those similarities, making connections there, and then they're going to explain their reasoning in writing in some way. So just to give you kind of an example here, is let's take an image like this, or a slide like this, that talks about Martin Luther King Jr. So I've got Martin Luther King Jr. was a pivotal figure in the American civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. As a Baptist minister and civil rights activist, King championed nonviolent resistance to achieve legal equality for African Americans, drawing inspiration from his Christian faith and Mahatma Gandhi's teachings. His leadership in organizing protests, marches, and civil disobedience campaigns, such as the Montgomery bus boycott and the March on Washington, brought national attention to racial injustice and contributed significantly to the passage of landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. King's powerful oratory, exemplified by his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech and his unwavering commitment to peaceful protest, earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. His efforts led to more genuine progress towards racial equality in America during his 13 years of leadership than the previous 350 years had produced, solidifying his legacy as one of the greatest nonviolent leaders in history. So thinking about a person like Martin Luther King Jr., if I jump back over here to this list of archetypes, pause the video for a minute and think about which of these archetypes would you connect with Martin Luther King Jr.? And then think about why. Why might you pick one over another? What characteristics did he have that match or connect with one of these characters? Again, if you're working with a partner and watching this with a partner, you might pause and have a quick discussion about that. So when I look at what the goals are of this activity, it's called an archetype foursquare. The idea here is there's guided inquiry. So you want some kind of guided or free inquiry on some sort of social studies or historical topic. Could be a specific event, could be a specific time period or era, could be a connection between eras, could be a specific individual. And what you're wanting students to do is really make those connections between the relationships between people and these bigger concepts of these big archetypal kind of concepts. Then you're having students synthesize. They're synthesizing and summarizing large amounts of information. And again, we're building on background knowledge, which we know is something, especially from brain research and a lot of the research on the reading of the science of reading, this is where our students really struggle, is having that background knowledge. So here's a great way to build on that background knowledge by making those connections. And then it provides that collaboration piece because you can do this in a jigsaw style format where each student may be responsible for one of these individuals or one slide on a slide deck, and then they're responsible for sharing and communicating that information to the rest of the group. Again, this is a kind of a template for this activity, this archetype Foursquare. And here are the steps for this. So step one, you would provide students with a list of characters, historical figures, and archetypes, or you could have students provide a list of all of the archetypes and have students decide. It really kind of depends on where your students are at this point. Step two, go over those archetypes, model as much as you need to. If this is the first time you've done this, you may need to do some more background information on what archetypes are, what that looks like. This is a great place to have conversations with your language arts colleagues as well. And then in step three, give them about 10 to 15 minutes. Of course, that's, depending on your students, to build each one of their slides. And then have students present or share their slides from their seats. 2 minutes or less as a group. They could present just within their group, and then you could also then have them share them out as a larger class. What I also love about this being a situation where you've created this slide deck is that now that's something that can be housed in an LMS like Google Classroom or Schoology or something like that, where it then becomes a study tool for students. They can go back and look at each of these. And if students have maybe chosen that Martin Luther King Jr. was a hero, or maybe he was more of a rebel, or maybe he was more of that sage character, having kids think about that from different perspectives is just going to build on that thinking that they have. Here is the Foursquare template. It looks like a Frere model. And this is just one example of this. This is also linked, I believe, in the slide deck for you to have access to. But you would have their name, the student's name. I've also seen teachers use in that center box where it has their name or your name, a link to maybe there's an article that you want them to read about that event. This could be tied into literature as well. Or tied into primary sources. I've seen one that was specific to Uncle Tom's Cabin and reading an excerpt about Uncle Tom's Cabin and then making this connection to these archetypes. Then you would have students, depending on if that's a person or an event, what image or emoji or icon they would use. Could be one that students create, could be one that students go out and find that represents that person. Then students would identify what the archetype is. From a modeling standpoint, I may start by telling students, possibly, here is the archetype that I want you to make the connection to. Then having students provide that rationale, that support. Why do they think this person represents this archetype? And then having them go beyond that. What is another representation in history or pop culture that they can make to this archetype as well? Another place to make some connections here, especially for our gifted and advanced learners, is to make those connections to the depth and complexity icons. So having students think about, once they have created this archetype, where are the connections that they can make to these depth and complexity icons. So for instance, I might think about, if I'm looking at the emojis or the icons, I'm focusing in on those details about that specific person. The rationale and support, those are my big ideas. Another representation, these are multiple perspectives, looking for patterns, having students even think across disciplines. There may be other connections that they can make to other content areas as well. I want to point your attention on this slide where it says birdseed. You might want to pause the video here as well. I'm going to jump out to this link. This takes you to Ian Birdseed's site. And he has a really good article here about character archetypes, provides some different ideas of how to introduce character archetypes for students as well. And then down here, as you scroll down towards the bottom, there's a really interesting link here. Pardon me while I scroll down, where it says where to go from here. And he has a worksheet linked here that is a PDF document that has kind of dig in a little bit more into a character's archetype, but also looking at the other part of those depth and complexity icons, thinking about parallels, some of the other connections that you can make here as well. So just wanted to point that link to your attention because that is a really kind of helpful piece. So pause for a moment, take a look and explore those, maybe jump back and forth, explore some of the other things here that we've looked at so far. All right. To wrap up in our last section, here's where we're going to talk a little bit about application and extension. I want to share with you just some other examples of how you can do this. One other thing that you can do is you can do what they call smashing of different EDUProtocols. So this is taking Iron Chef, which is another EDUProtocol, and combining that with Archetypes. What Iron Chef does is, again, it's another kind of jigsaw type of piece where there's a slide deck that's provided. Each student or students are provided one source to look at, and that could be a primary source, it could be a piece of text. Then they are finding facts or an image. Each student has one slide and they have 10 minutes to create this. And each student adds a secret ingredient, an extra image, a quote, a meme, similar to like the Iron Chef idea about that particular topic. So I want to share with you an example here of one of these that looks like this. This is one that was created by, I believe, Adam Muller. And when you open up, you have like, here's who your chefs are. The second slide gives you your steps. So step one, as a group, you want students to choose a founding father or a signer here. So they have these people. Step two, they're reading and researching. So read, collect about 5 facts about your chosen signer, add a picture, and then discuss and decide which archetype works best for that person and include evidence. And then again, in this case, they provided students with, here are 5 different archetypes that you can choose from. Again, depending on where your students are at, how often you have done this, how comfortable they are with archetypes, you might give them the whole list and make that a little bit more of an open inquiry. And then each student has a slide to work with. Which archetype represents their signer? Why did you choose this one? Who's another person similar? Here's your secret ingredient. Here's an image, and then 5 facts about that signer. So again, having kids learn about those individual characters, you could then extend this even farther by having students then do some sort of ranking type of exercise where maybe they rank which of these archetypes do you think is most important or most significant? Which of these signers was most important or most significant? So you might pause for a moment here. Feel free to kind of explore, think about how you could use this within your own classroom. And then just some other examples to share with you of other ways that you could kind of use archetypes and the 4 square of this EDUProtocol. The first one we've kind of already looked at, choosing a historical figure and event, engage in discussion, create a presentation or infographics, comparing that historical figure to other examples in history or literature, having students analyze a primary source by identifying archetypes present in the document, looking at language, imagery, symbolism. If you think about creative activities, I really think this one's interesting. Have students choose a historical event or maybe choose a different person and rewrite that story from the perspective of a different archetype. So maybe starting with Andrew Jackson in the Trail of Tears, what archetype would you typically assign to him? Now rewrite that event, rewrite that story of that event from the point of view of a different archetype. I think this one is also really interesting. Choose a recent event that could be linked to an archetype, facilitate a discussion where the students explore how that event reflects the chosen archetype. Challenge students to identify modern day individuals or groups or events that embody that same archetype and compare. So just some other examples of ways that you could pull in archetypes and make those historical connections. Once again, this is access to the presentation that is linked. So you have access to that. And hopefully this has been beneficial for you. Again, my name is Kelly Bellar. My contact information is here on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions or if you've started playing with EDUProtocols or have tried this archetype activity. Would love to see how this works for you, if it does work. Hopefully you that you have a good rest of your summer. And we will see you later. Thanks.